pretty amazing.
Yeah.
You just slept through it.
I like to think my dreams are so loud I can't hear anything in my life. It's all turned up to 11.
Speaking of loud, what was your experience at the rodeo? The last few concerts I've been to, and like last year I went to the rodeo, I keep thinking, this is too freaking loud.
No, I was the opposite last night. I literally could have a conversation at this level with Megan, and I was like, I don't know if it's where we were sitting or what was going on, but I was like, this seems really quiet. I mean, our daughters were sitting in another
You already have
section. I
glasses.
was
You need
like,
a hearing aid now.
God, don't give me that.
We'll
That's a good
present you
one.
with one on the podcast.
So I went last year to a show with a few friends, and like driving home, we were all complaining. You know, we're all in our 40s.
Yeah.
We're all complaining like how loud it was. There's too many people.
Starts
And then-
really late.
Yeah, it starts so late, and like, you know, we went on a Thursday or something.
Yeah.
And so we're thinking, how can we on our keychains like have a little thing with earplugs? Because I find myself in environments where I just wish.
It's called
Weren't so loud.
AirPods. Just put them
Oh,
in
maybe
noise
that's what it is,
canceling
AirPods.
mode. But all right, I think we've rambled enough. We need
Yeah,
to get into this. People
let's
are
do it.
like, all right, guys, come on.
Oh,
chop,
were
chop,
we
chop, chop."
recording? Okay.
I don't know, probably.
At some point, we were recording in there.
I think last week we were talking for a while at the beginning before it starts, but I don't know. Chuck will remember.
I don't know. I thought at one point last week, I was asking her a question about some of the design, and you're like, no, we're recording.
Yeah,
I didn't think we were
Never
recording.
know.
But here we go.
Never know.
Exodus.
it's always recording. All right, so we're picking up in a spot where we've gotten a bunch of different instructions on how to make a bunch of things. Right?
Yep.
This is God giving Moses. Let's give the context. Like, this is him up on the mountain.
Up on the
So
mountain.
they ratified the covenant
Yeah.
as a people. They said, we will agree to this. We want to be his people. They had the feast where there was blood sprinkled on them. So they ratified the covenant.
Yep.
And then he goes up on the mountain to have all the instructions, all the instructions and the law from Yahweh.
And this is
For 40 days and 40
the
nights.
smoke is up there and the fire. No, he's just up there.
yeah.
He is up there in the presence of God, yes.
Yeah, and everybody hears all this, right? Everybody can hear
They
this
hear
all
the Ten
happening.
Commandments.
Yeah.
They hear all of that as part of the covenant. Like they've heard the law from God.
But then this part, do you think they hear that too or no?
No, because I think that's why they get scared.
Yeah.
Ah, okay.
Because he's
Because
gone for 40 days and 40 nights.
in the presence of God.
Mm-hmm.
Because remember, the ground is trembling and there's thunder and lightning and it
Yeah.
seems like a scene, you know?
They
and
think he went up there and he's dead in this storm.
they don't know.
Yeah.
It
Well,
seems
they
like
don't know.
they say at one point in
Yeah, it's
this, like,
later
we
on.
don't know what happened to that guy.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
We're going to get to that.
We
I'm
are going to
sure.
get to that. So-
Okay.
And remember also, we mentioned that there's 7 speeches within this that Yahweh gives Moses. So we're supposed to be thinking, oh, this is a new creation story.
Yeah.
And then on the 7th speech, we'll see is about the Sabbath, keeping the Sabbath. So he goes through, the Lord said this 7 times, and the last one's the Sabbath. That's what's going on during these 40 days and 40 nights. This is what I'm creating the nation of Israel. These are my people. These are my commandments. This is how you live with me in my presence under my rule.
Yeah. All right. So this week it started in 26 where we get to the actual tabernacle itself. So
Yeah, so really this unit, the book is divided into sections. This
Yeah.
section really goes back to 25,
Okay.
where these instructions begin. It's the contributions for the sanctuary, for this
Yep.
tabernacle, and then instructions for how to build the Ark of the Covenant, the table for bread, the golden lampstand. We're picking up in 26 this week, a continuation of that.
So do you think, like, I mean, it's interesting as you read this, and if you're just reading, again, a chapter a day, I mean, it's like, wow, these are like really super specific instructions.
Yeah.
And I guess for people who can just be like, okay, well, yeah, I mean, it's just like I read an IKEA manual or something. You know, what is there something we should glean from this?
Can we just skip over them? Do they matter?
Specificity?
Yeah.
Specificity?
You already had it.
Okay, I already had it. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. I just think that's something that would be a comment because, again, like it kept coming up. So I'm like, man, this is just really specific, really intentional.
Yeah.
Is there a
Lots
reason
of
why do
details.
we think?
There's even more in Leviticus.
I mean, does that speak to something about like God's character or just of his like exacting plans and he knows?
Well, we even talked, so like I just said, this is a new creation story, which we are supposed to know. So just knowing that, I think, is helpful. And we talked about how the lampstand is supposed to make us think of the tree in the garden, the tree of life. And so it's all these things that are hearkening back to creation, the pattern of the purposes of God. And a lot of this is about that. So just that in and of itself, even if you don't understand every single detail, recognizing those echoes of the garden, that's important.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I kind of want to think back to how children who grew up in the Hebrew culture would have known this story so well. It would have been taught to them that by the time they're adults, they have this part of the scriptures memorized. So think of like in the New Testament, the Apostle Paul, who was a Pharisee before, like they knew this so well. It was in their minds. So they're taught from a young age. But for us, I think most of us we don't grow up that way. We're not taught these things. And so I'm certain that a lot of people going through this with us, this may be the first time they ever read this. And so it feels very foreign. And you sit and read one chapter a day. So like chapter 26, you just read instructions about a tent. And you're like, well, that was my reading for the day. What does that matter? I think that kind of gets to the heart of what you're asking.
Yeah, but even the net, like why recording it so specifically, and like not just like he gave them some plans, and they made it out of materials that they had to kind of like give up or sacrifice with what they had to construct this place.
Yeah,
I don't know. You don't have to answer. I was just curious.
no. The more I read this, the deeper my understanding of the whole thing gets. And the more I see these connections that Rachel's talking about, like to the creation story, that God is speaking to Moses 7 times, giving 7 different sets of instructions. That's meant to take my mind back. That's meant to help me see this is something complete, that the Sabbath is the 7th one, connects me even more. Like what I'm saying is, if you're reading this for the first time and you read a chapter a day and you're thinking like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do with this, that's normal.
Yeah.
Stick with it, because for the rest of your life, continue to go back to this and read, because it will come more and more alive to you. And so here's what I want to say to help answer that question.
Exodus is your favorite book, which you did say.
I did text y'all this morning. I love it so much. Okay, so this part, chapter 25 to the end of the book, really is one piece of scripture.
Yeah.
And we were talking before we started recording that what we have in this week's reading are the instructions. This is what you're supposed to do. And next week's reading, it's a record of them doing it.
Yeah.
But right in the middle is their rebellion, the golden calf. The way it's designed with all of the detail and the way the pieces are put together are meant to draw us to something. The literary design of these books that were originally scrolls tell us something even without having to say what they're saying.
Explicitly say it. Yeah, I mean, that's part of the context. There's theological context, there's a literary context, there's the cultural context, and we have to pay attention to all of them.
Yep.
Yeah.
And we have to learn how to pay, to say we have to pay attention sounds easy, but it's something that you have to learn. And there's a lot of resources out there to help you do this. So don't be discouraged if you don't understand why all this is in there. Like, lean in. We're hoping to be part of a resource that helps you see it.
And I think some of this, like as you get to the end and you think about it, like just how and maybe it wasn't super possibly unique at the time, and that this is like, all the gold, all the stuff that they had, like kind of having to give that up. So it's like, oh yeah, this is all stuff I'm going to take with me, but God's maybe repurposing a lot of that, what we see later on. And so
yes, and really a lot of the gold and these precious jewels, it should make you think of the garden because they're present in the garden. But this is part of what whenever we say the Bible is written not to us, but for us. Yes. So it is very, very practical because they really did have to do all of these things.
Yeah.
And they were supposed to remember because it matters to who they are as a people. But there's also all this theology in there that's for all of humanity. So it's a really good example of that.
Yeah.
It's for us, but it's not to us. So we don't have to know how to create the temple, but we should know why God is doing what he's doing.
And I mean, just kind of moving along in here, it gets us like even like getting into the whole like the garments, like the details of like what they had to wear and stuff, and just like I mean, I'm glad like I can just wear my t-shirt and shorts and shoes to go to church now.
Well, it wasn't everyone wore this; it was just the priest. But yeah, and so I think one of the things that my attention was drawn to in just the reading of the garments is how the priests would have this breastplate with the stones with the names of the tribes. It said that he would bear the names of the people before God, because remember, the priest is the one that represents the people before God and also represents God back to the people. And I don't know, because we've talked about bearing God's name as part of the commandments and all that, the priest is bearing the people's name. And it was just an interesting thing that my mind picked up on.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I mean, even the garments, they have the same colors and the same stones that are in the very center of the tabernacle where God's presence resides, which again is like the garden.
Yeah.
So it's like they're sort of representing the glory of God, the presence of God. So they represent him to the people, but then when they go in, they're representing the people to God. So the garments do matter.
Yeah.
So, I think we should talk about the tabernacle, like why it's important.
Yeah.
And we say it's drawing us back to creation, but why? Why is that important? Why do you think?
Just keep going. I see
Oh,
it right there.
yeah. So it's because creation is the place where God and people were together. Central to the biblical story is this idea that what God really wants is to be among his people. And what he really wants is for his people to experience heaven on earth, the union of his space and our space. And the fall in Genesis 3, we know that Adam and Eve had to leave God's presence in that way. But this is a renewal of God wanting to be with his people and how that's supposed to happen. That's why there's all this symbolism and connection to Eden.
And
If you remember our categories, if you have the bookmark, Genesis is the pattern. That's the pattern of God's purposes for all creation. And we're in this partial part of the story now. So he's promised that he's going to go back to the pattern. This is what it looks like partially. So his presence with his people, he's giving them a place. I mean, it's all those categories that he's going back to.
All right. So I brought this resource I've had for a long time. It's called the Rose Guide to the Tabernacle. It's because it's from Rose Publishing. Have you ever seen this?
No.
Okay. So some of the maps that are in your study Bible
Yeah.
actually come from this.
Oh.
So here you go. If you want to get one of these on Amazon, they make one for the temple as well. But it's super cool because I think you'll like this, Ted. Okay. This is a picture of the nation around the tabernacle. It's supposed to be in the middle. But you come to this page and it has like these...
Oh, the layers.
Where you can see what it was supposed to look like on the inside.
Man, somebody really creative really thought that out well.
Tree.
Yeah, the tree, the lampstand is meant to be the tree of life.
I mean, so ultimately, this is like not the first time, but this is definitely God giving them instructions for like, hey, here's how I'm going to interact and dwell with you. This is like I've established you as a nation, and this is how we're going to react or interact with each other.
Yeah.
This is the...
And so if you've not seen pictures like this, you can just Google tabernacle and these images like these come up. But I don't remember where I heard this, but I've always held on to it as just a helpful way to understand this space. So you can think of it almost like a bank. You know, when you go into a bank, anyone can walk into a bank and be in the lobby. That's the place for the customers, right? But then the employees are the ones who can go behind the counter. The tellers are the ones that are working behind the counter and managing everything. But then even beyond that is a space where the vault is. And like maybe only the manager can go in there.
Yeah.
And so there's these like layers of access. That's a way to think about how the tabernacle is designed. So there is a perimeter and the people can go into the courtyard. But then only the priests can go from that space into the holy place, and then only the high priest can go from the holy place into the most holy place.
Yeah.
Right?
Only sometimes.
And only sometimes.
After atonement and consecration and purification.
Yeah. Which that brings up the next thing I want to talk about a little bit was just this idea of when they're talking about the priests and the consecration and ordination. And I think like some of that, like I get that was, again, it was for this specific thing, but is there something that, we should glean or we should influence our, I guess, how we come to, not church, but the presence of the Lord, or I don't know. Like, is there some I'm not
Yes.
saying we need to do
Yeah.
all this stuff, but some of that, like, I mean, there's a lot of words used in here to describe. There's a lot of,
Only specific people and only after very specific, again, atonement and purification procedures.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what it means to go into the very presence of God's dwelling place. So where his actual residing place is, to be in that intimate space with him takes all these things. And we should be considering that as we read through this. And just like you're saying, not just when we go to church, but when we pray, when we go before the throne of God in prayer, we that's what we should be thinking about when
Yeah.
we're reading this. Because what does it take for us to do that now?
Yeah.
yeah,
I think a lot of that, like, that will drive our conversation next week.
okay,
I think more so.
okay. How so? Just
Well, but,
Yeah,
yeah,
so this is looking backwards. That's what we're talking about.
Okay.
And I just want to, we mentioned this in the last episode, but Daniel Swafford wrote a really great article called The Blueprints of Eden.
Okay.
It's about the tabernacle and how it looks like Eden. And so we're sending that out to everyone who's registered to get resources from us. And I think that will just be helpful just to like make those connections because we're not going to do that in detail.
Maybe you should read the resources we're sending out.
I'm saying if you want to like look at something, it's simple and straightforward and really helpful.
Does that article also get posted on Clear Creek Resources?
It is on Clear Creek
Okay,
Resources
so you
as well.
even if you didn't get it
That's
sent
right, you
to
can find
you
it.
can find
Yeah.
it.
Yeah.
Okay.
What was it called?
Blueprint of Eden.
Blueprint of Eden.
And Daniel Swafford wrote that. It's really helpful. But so it looks backwards, but it also does look forward. And we will talk more about that next week. But as you're reading through this week or contemplating or praying, I mean, you should be thinking about what does this mean for who Jesus is and what he has done.
Yep.
Because he tabernacled among us. He's the high priest. He's all these things that also look backward and forward always.
Yep. Yeah, you're like, oh, so good.
No, it is so good. And like, I spent some time just trying to meditate on what is this telling me? Why does this matter for me? Because there's a ton of instruction with detail. It's hard to wrap my mind around, even with pictures, to really get a sense of it. And it goes back to what I was saying a minute ago, that God's desire is to be with me. God's desire is to be with us. It's not just me, but like, is to live among his people. And at this point, this was how he revealed that at this point of the story and to his people, that he was making a nation so that he could fulfill his promise to Abraham that these people would become a blessing to all people. And we know that happened through Jesus. But his desire to be with us hasn't changed.
Yep.
And I was just trying to think through like why this matters, because it fills me with such hope and grace. And I just think about where these people came from out of Egypt, where they have all of these gods, and Yahweh is trying to teach them that he is different than every other god. There is no one like him. And there is no relationship to any god like a relationship with him. And so, I don't know. I just found myself thinking, like, how do we know that all this is real? How do we know God is real? And it's because of what happened here and the thread of the story. Is because I can say, I know him.
Yeah.
I know him. He wants to be known by his people, which is why all this is even happening, because he wants to be among his people.
Yeah.
And I also was just thinking a lot about the fact that we sometimes think, oh, sure, like I said, we can go pray. Like God loves me and wants to be with me. And so if I want to accept his invitation, I will. Sort of forget the magnitude of what that means, the holiness of God. So the fact that we can not just be in his presence, but bear his name and presence, what that means. I mean, that's what all these details are about all the things you have to do to even just be in his presence. He wants to be with us.
Yeah.
But not only does it take a lot of work, but we often reject him as well. And so just thinking through it, because in our culture, we're sometimes like, oh yeah, like God loves you, he wants to be with you. But this is really what it required for that to happen.
Yeah. I mean, there was
In the old covenant.
literal and metaphorical sacrifices going on to allow and make a way for people to even
barriers.
enter.
Yes.
Yeah.
Specific people.
the little bells on their on the bottom of
Little
their
golden
clothes.
bells, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So if they stopped ringing, maybe they maybe they
There's something wrong?
yeah.
Well, I mean, there is a story later in the Torah of Aaron's sons who go before God.
And they do
And they
their
shouldn't
own
have.
thing.
Yeah, they didn't go his way, and he strikes them dead. Aaron's sons,
Yeah.
Nadab and Abihu, I think. Yeah. Anyway, okay.
Sorry. So I think we get. I'm just going to try and keep us moving
Yeah, yeah.
here. So we get to kind of the end of these instructions, which I'm sure like Moses is like, oh man, like how are we going to like do this? But then God reveals like, hey, listen, through my spirit, I've equipped some folks to be able to do this. And then ultimately, we read later on, kind of the next week stuff. It wasn't just those two guys.
Right.
It was like kind of like everybody.
Everybody's going to contribute. Yeah.
Everyone was invited to participate.
Everybody was- yeah.
Anyone who was willing, you donate your resources, whether that's your gifts, whether it's your skills, whether it's your money and gold. Like everyone was invited to participate.
Yeah, and so I think that was just a good reminder of like ultimately God's going to call us to some great things that we're going to probably feel like I don't see how that can really happen, but you know God's going to equip and make a way.
Yep.
And I think as a creative person, like reading these words, I mean that's a
Yeah.
like oh man, I can identify with a little bit of that. Like I feel like I'm using the gifts that God has given me, the way He's wired me.
Yeah.
And his spirit is at work in those who are creative in this story too, which
Yeah.
I love that too. It's not just people who are preaching on Sundays. The God's spirit has always been working
Yeah.
through those who are creative, who are making manifest his glory and beauty in a different way.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Anything before we get to 32? Because
Yes.
it's
so
about to happen.
The second half of 31.
Okay.
The Sabbath. So Rachel pointed out, God gives 7 different instructions. The last one is the Sabbath.
Okay.
I just want to draw our attention to, let's see, starting in verse 12 and 13. You are to speak to the people of Israel and say, above all, you shall keep my Sabbaths, for this is a sign between me and you throughout your generations, that you may know that I, the Lord, sanctify you. I want to draw our attention to, he says, this is a sign. And if you've tracked along so far, what should feel familiar is that he says the same thing to Noah after the flood when he says the rainbow will be as a sign to you that I won't destroy. And then later, so that's a connection to his promise, his covenant with Noah. And then later to Abraham, he gives Abraham a sign of circumcision. He's like, here's my promise to you, and here's the way this relationship is going to work. And the sign that I give you for that this is our connection is circumcision. And now with Moses, he says, you will be my people. And the sign that you trust in me and that we're living into this together is that you will observe the Sabbath. You will take a day and trust me.
Yeah. Well, that's why when I read, I wasn't going to say anything, but the whole idea of in 31:14, you shall keep the Sabbath because it is holy for you. Everyone who profanes it shall be put to death. And you start thinking about how many times the Pharisees are like, Jesus doing something on the Sabbath.
Yes.
We're putting him to death.
So that's what I want
Yeah.
to, that is their law. Like this is what drives them. And so you can try, hopefully that helps you see the culture in which Jesus lived. So when he does something on the Sabbath that doesn't fit with what they say should be happening, it's because at this point they've distorted the Sabbath. They've turned it into something, they've changed the heart of it.
Yeah.
And so Jesus is trying to help them redefine it. But you can understand now why they get so upset and they say, he's breaking the rules, we have to punish him.
Also, even just to piggyback on what you're saying about the covenants. So, and just think about the progressive nature of that with how God's relating with his people. So the first one, the sign is, I'm never going to destroy all of humanity again. The second one is, I'm promising not just that I'm not going to destroy you, but that you're going to have descendants who will bless the whole world. So that's the sign of circumcision. And this one is, this is what it looks like to be my people, to be in relationship with me and live with me. And it's the sign of what that looks like, which is resting in his presence and provision. So there's a lot of details and work, but it is also trusting in what God gives and who he is on that seventh day. So, even like how his signs are working, you can see the progressive nature of his story.
And you track that all the way to Jesus and then the New Testament church, where the sign of the new covenant with Jesus is baptism.
And Lord's Supper?
And
Or not so much?
Yeah, the initial sign is baptism.
Okay.
But again, what were you going to say?
Nothing.
Oh, It's the progressive nature of that. Like this is what it looks like, the Sabbath. But then the next part of that progression is death and new life.
Yeah.
You know, you're connecting to the death of Jesus. You're laying down your own life and rising anew, walking with Him and in the Spirit.
All right, let's get to 32.
32. This is
So this
crazy.
is the middle of the two sets of
this unit.
of the unit. The first instructions, later the execution of that, and here
It's another famous story. So
Yeah.
we have napkin verses last year was sort of one of our themes. We have napkin stories, I
Yeah.
think, in the Old
With
Testament.
feltboard stories.
Billboards, that's right.
From Sunday
Like, what am
school
I
in
going
the
to give you all
80s.
in next
Yeah.
year? That's one of these, is the golden calf story. We know it, but within the context, it's important to sit in because it is the center. And it's also, so we just had this creation, right? This new creation, these 7 days with ends and Sabbath. Now rest in who I am and who you are in me. And then it's almost like we're at Genesis 3, right? We see this, here's the covenant, here's the promise, here's creation, and here's the fall.
Yeah.
That's the literary pattern that we're seeing over and over.
And what you sent us this morning, like draw the connection to that. Are you ready for that?
Or what she sent us last night, but really this
Oh
morning.
yeah, she just
Yeah, so
typed a
I
text
just
at 1 in the
was
morning.
just even so we are seeing these patterns over and over again, and we saw this scenario is so similar to what happened in Genesis 3, what happens with Cain and Abel, what happens with Noah, again, really explicitly what happens with Abraham. So in Genesis 17, the covenant with Abraham is ratified. Do you remember that? And then the next chapter is this story about Sodom and Gomorrah. And if you remember back to that, they're on this hilltop and Abraham is with God. And God's saying, hey, should we tell Abraham what we're about to do to Sodom and Gomorrah? Because they're crying out to me the injustice, and I'm going to destroy all of them. And so Abraham starts to say, hey, well, what if there's righteous people down there? What are you doing? And then Yahweh says over and over again, yeah, if there's even 10, I will save them. So Abraham is saying, but you are one who is just. That's the way of Yahweh. So why would you kill everyone? And Yahweh says, I won't. If there's anyone, I will save them. And you have this same scenario here. So there's this covenant, it's ratified, and then they're up on this mountain, and it's his representative with Yahweh. It's the people's representative with Yahweh. And there's this rebellion. There's this sin. Before it was sin against others, and now it's sin against Yahweh. So it's always hurting others or idolatry. You can see that throughout the Bible too. And God says, I'm going to destroy all of them. It's very similar language, and Moses says, please don't do it. He intercedes on behalf of the people. And not only does God say, okay, I won't, but just like with Abraham, his mercy and grace is way more than Moses would have thought possible. And that's really what we'll talk about next week.
Yeah, I mean, it really does seem like it happens in a snap. I mean, there's only a couple verses where all of a sudden they're like,
Where's Moses?
Yeah, he's gone. Like, it's been a while. Like,
Right.
maybe he's gone. They fix this, Aaron. Like, make us, what does he say? Make us gods who shall go before us.
Yeah.
Oh,
They're used to, think about that too. I mean, just like in our context, we want familiar gods. You know, it is throughout even just what we've gone through in the Old Testament so far, it takes trust, it takes surrender in who God is and that his promises are true. And there's this continual return to what we think is good, what the world around us defines as good and God. And that's what they do so quickly. I mean, he said, I'm going to do all these signs in Egypt so you will know that I'm Yahweh. So everyone will know that I am Yahweh. And then it's 40 days or less than that, and they say, we're afraid. This is too much. So
Yeah.
give us a God that we can control, that we can recognize, that we aren't afraid of, and it ends in destruction.
So you remember the last few weeks or throughout this process, we've talked about how all Lord is the name Yahweh.
Yeah.
And then God is Elohim.
yeah.
So try reading this by saying Yahweh and Elohim. So, like, I'm going to 32.
Which one? Which verse are you starting?
Let's just go 32. When the people saw that Moses delayed to come down from the mountain, the people gathered themselves together up to Aaron and said, "Up, make us Elohim who shall go before us. As for this Moses, the man who brought us up out of Egypt, we do not know what has become of him." So Aaron said to them, "Take off the rings of gold." So they did all that. And then in verse 4, and he received the gold from their hand and fashioned it with a graving tool and made a golden calf. And he said, "These are your Elohim, O Israel, who brought you up out of the land of Egypt. Tomorrow shall be a feast to Yahweh." At the end of verse 5.
Oh,
So in this is their attempt at also worshiping and controlling, in a sense, still Yahweh.
yeah. And he even saying, "These are the
Yeah.
Elohim that have brought you out of
Right. And so it's very
out of
unclear,
Egypt."
or which commandment are they breaking?
Yeah.
Are they worshiping other gods? Or are they making an image of Yahweh? Either way, it's literally
Yeah.
the first two commandments that
That's
Yahweh
right.
had just given them that
Yeah.
they break.
They had heard.
Yes.
Yeah.
And also just thinking about the fact, like we talked about image of God and how we are supposed to be his images, and then they create this golden calf to be this idol, this image of Yahweh. And then God actually says they're a stiff-necked people, which stiff-necked people, it's like they're becoming like this golden calf. Instead of reflecting who God is and his character, which was the point in the garden, which was the point for the Israelites at this time, they start to look like the golden calf. It's just so sad.
Yeah. And in there, it says that it doesn't make it super clear. It says that when God spoke to Moses, like they're down there having a party. And it wasn't just like having a celebration. There was some debauchery. I mean,
Yeah.
they were worshiping in ways that pagans would worship their gods. It was not good. And the reason that's such a problem is because what Rachel said, they are the image of God. Not this calf. The humans are the image of God. And when they're acting in these ways that are outside of his character and what he wants for them, they're actually defiling the image of God in what they say is their worship of him. All in the midst of him trying to give instructions on how to worship. When you come, you
Yeah.
come
This
with
is how you
reverence.
worship, and you're a kingdom of priests. You
Yeah.
are my treasured possession to bear my name among the whole world. And then this is immediately what happens.
Yep.
It's the fall.
It is. It is. And wrapped up in their worship, he actually gives them instruction to celebrate and to feast and to do all these things, but not in a way that defiles who they are, in a way that elevates them into the life that he wants for them, to help them flourish and to be connected and partnered with him. And like, it is just this golden calf thing is more than just a statue that was made that they say is him or that they try to worship. The whole experience is undoing what he wants for them.
It's an inversion of everything
Yep.
he just called them to.
Yeah.
Yep.
And then we see, God, let me alone that my wrath may burn hot
Yeah.
against them and
Burn
I may
hot.
consume them.
Which is
Hot.
very similar language
What'd I
that he
say?
used
Burn
with Gomorrah too.
I don't know. But then the very next verse, but Moses implored the Lord. And then this is where we get him kind of pleading like,
Yeah.
hey,
And it seems strange that Moses, a man, could talk to God, and it seems like maybe God changes his mind. But I think I said a few weeks ago, what I see in Moses this time I'm reading through, is when Moses, everything goes right with Moses, he seems like the ideal human. Not in the way Jesus was, but in a way where he is reflecting the image of God. He is partnered with God. They have a partnership, and they are working together for the flourishing of now this nation. And so I think that that's what's happening in this relationship. There is a connection that is meant to show us what could be.
yeah.
And he's trusting in Yahweh's covenant with
Yep.
Abraham
Yep.
and with Israelites. He reminds Yahweh of the covenant. This is why you shouldn't do this, because we're in a covenant together.
Yeah. I mean, that's what he said. He's like, dude, hey, just turn away from your burning anger. And they say, hey, remember Abraham, Isaac, blah, blah. Like, I will multiply your offspring as the stars in the heaven. Like,
That's right.
He's calling back to all these things.
Yeah,
Like,
we're your covenant people. This
Yeah.
is how you rescue everyone. This is your unconditional promise.
yep.
And so we know, and Yahweh knows, he's not going to do this, but he's inviting Moses to participate. And then Moses actually goes down and he does reflect who Yahweh is. His anger burns against the people. So anger at the extent of their sin and idolatry, that's not bad. That has to be, because it's the opposite of flourishing. It's the opposite of love and what God calls us to. And Moses reflects that when he goes down. There's justice, but there's still mercy and kindness and goodness in it too. So.
Dude, it's awesome. He took the calf that they had made and burned it with fire to the ground into a powder, scattered it on water, made the people of Israel drink it.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's hardcore.
Yeah, and that's another pattern we see. I'm going to try to stop using that word, but very often the punishment fits the crime. You know, like what Jacob does ends up happening to him. We sort of see that over and over again. And so they're sort of having to just reap the consequences of what they've done.
Yeah. Are we going?
It's not arbitrary.
Yeah, and it's not just that, but like Moses turns, he's like, "Who's with me? Who's with Yahweh?" and turns them loose with swords to go kill people.
Oh, yeah.
And
then a bunch of people died.
a bunch of people die.
The people who are responsible.
Yeah.
Which was interesting. That actually, I don't know why, but it had me thinking of like just kind of like the old covenant, like in the things passing there, because it was like they had to. It's like we're gonna play Red Rover, but with swords or something. Isn't that what like how it is described there? They're gonna pass by one another.
Yeah, they're going to go through. And
Yeah.
Red
anyway.
Rover, Red Rover. What has come out of the
terrible
last
game
few
now.
weeks? A gentle plundering or whatever you said. Gentle plunder and a Red Rover with swords.
Or a
Friendly-
polite plunder.
A polite
Yeah,
plunder.
polite.
Whatever it was you said. Yeah.
Well, I don't know. Are we going to 33? I forget what we said.
I mean, this week does go through 33.
Okay.
And again, this isn't linear.
Yeah.
This is put in there to connect to. They're not actually leaving Sinai. It says the command to leave Sinai. They don't leave Sinai here. This is, remember, one big unit, and in the middle they rebel, but God is now giving them instructions about the future.
Yeah.
Yeah. Moses asks him like to see his glory, and he says, you have favor. I'm showing you favor. I mean, favor is really, it's how grace is really depicted in the Bible, is showing undeserved favor. And so Moses finds this grace to see a part of the glory of God in this moment, which sounds like, oh, he saw the glory of God. I don't know what that means, but it's a really big moment in Scripture.
The word glory in Hebrew is also the word for weight, the weightiness, it's more than just, I don't know, some magnificence. It's
His reputation,
Yeah.
his character. It's the fullness of who God is. Let me see the fullness of who you are.
Which to me, it seems like an interesting thing now to do that. Like, okay, you think like you have the burning bush thing, that first thing, like, okay, this is weird, he gets it. Then just all that he experienced, but from that point to this point, and now he's asking that. I don't know, it just seems like a little bit of a weird, not weird. I wonder if it's timely or why then?
Well, it seems like he's continuing to experience more and more of who God is, starting with the burning bush. And he goes through the cloud up on the mountain, and he's up there with God in some way, but it's still not all of who God is.
Yeah.
And so I don't know. Again, he has an experience unlike anything we know, and he wants more.
Yeah.
He's like, show me all of who you are. And that's when God says, well, I can't.
Yeah, I can't do
That
that.
would kill you.
But you can see some.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we see then it's reflected in Moses when he comes down. I just want, because we're going to talk more about this next week. So this week, as you continue reading these next sections, not to add more homework to everybody, but if you read in John 1, start with 1:14 and read through 14 through 18, John 1, 14 through 18, and just think through the parallels between these stories that we're talking about right now and what we see in John 1, 14 through 18, who Jesus is and what he's done.
All right, any final words to close this out today? You're like, Lance, you should have just stopped talking. It could have been Rachel finishing.
No. I was going to say, she could just read John 1, 14 through 18. That'd
Okay,
be
I
it.
will.
Yeah.
But Rachel can
That'd
end
be
our
helpful.
podcast
Okay.
that way.
All right. So read through this, pray about this, think through this, because Again, we're looking backwards because it's the pattern, but we're always looking forward because Jesus fulfills every single detail in big picture story that we're talking about. And the Word, that's Jesus, became flesh and dwelt or tabernacled among us. And the Word became flesh and dwelt among us, and we have seen his glory. Glory as of the only Son from the Father, full of grace and truth. John bore witness about him and cried out, "This was he of whom I said, he who comes after me ranks before me, because he was before me." For from his fullness we have all received grace upon grace. For the law was given to Moses, and grace and truth came through Jesus Christ. No one has ever seen God, the only God who's at the Father's side. He has made him known. I mean, that's this story in Jesus. It's incredible. Oh, I didn't know we were actually trying to end.
Sorry.
I don't know why I still don't know that.
So we're
Whenever
trying to
you
end?
just like do this, I'm always like, you about to say something?
Oh, you're like, good. Do you want me to give you like a double wig thing, or do we need to do a?
No, I
pull
should
in
just
your
know
ear.
that by now.
You can subscribe to receive additional resources to help you study the story of Scripture at clearcreekresources.org. We'll see you next week.